A boy named Ed woke up in the middle of the street, staring at the tall buildings in confusion, as if he couldn't believe he was there. A worried Elia leaned over him, anxiously asking if he was okay. She admits she slipped in the mud, but Ed just waves her off, assuring her he's fine and urging her to get to work before the other kids. Then the girl perks up and enthusiastically agrees. Meanwhile, another girl energetically hangs out laundry in the warm sun, humming a cheerful tune. She deftly shakes the wet fabric, rhythmically shaking out the water, as if turning a routine into a game. Later, Mina happily reports that they managed to find work today, and Ed, standing by the river with a basin, hears his name called. At that moment, he recalls the strange sensation of falling that morning, as if something important had flashed in his memory. Then fragments of images appear in the boy's mind: a train station, a glittering phone screen, mountains, and a bustling city. He realizes that these images are not of this world and perhaps belong to his past life. Mina notices his frown and anxiously asks if he has a headache. Then, with a smile, she promises to cure him in her own way, which elicits a slight surprise and an involuntary smile from Ed. The girl, unabashed, begins to hum a cheerful song about freedom and flying, despite her fatigue. Ed blushes and asks her to stop, assuring her he already feels great, but Mina only laughs and continues. Meanwhile, the grown woman thanks the merchant, who praises her diligence and hands her 3 copper coins, adding a small bonus on top. He invites her to come again, and she, beaming, promises to definitely return. Meanwhile, 2 men are discussing whether to let the children work again. One says the girl is working diligently, so they're allowed to. The children stand nearby, listening silently, as if afraid to interfere. One of the men doubts that these guys are not from the slums, especially the dark-haired boy, but Mina, with a joyful smile, grabs Ed's hand and pulls him forward, not giving him time to hesitate. After a while, they enter a narrow alley and ask for some food. A passerby, watching indifferently, assumes such requests are commonplace here, as hunger is a familiar companion for the locals. After this, the group heads through the village. Someone remembers they need to buy beans. The narrator notes that their goal now is simple: to survive the day without hunger and conserve their strength for the next. The memoirs mention that 8 years ago, refugees settled beyond the walls of Trey, in the ruined city of Lanielda. Back then, everyone dreamed of one day returning home and starting life anew. Ed, looking out at the gray streets, reflects that, as a 6-year-old, he never knew any other life. Everything that happens outside their world seems alien and distant to him, like something out of an adult story. Finally, the children return to the clinic sign. Inside, a woman apologizes for not being able to pay for the treatment, but the nurse gently replies that the debt can be paid later and asks her to take care of herself. When Ed enters the house, he's greeted by a cheerful hostess, and Mina excitedly tells her mother she did the laundry today. Her mother laughs and praises her daughter for her efforts, filling the house with joy and warmth. Later, the girl thanks the man for the dinner, explaining that she earned 3 copper coins and is going to buy Urku beans. He nods with a kind smile, promising to cook and reminding her that their family sticks together. At the table, someone whispers words of gratitude to Rathilier-sama for today, holding a bowl of boiled beans in their hands and a spoon lying next to them, as if in respect for the food. The children are told to eat first because their father will be home late. One of them takes a spoon, tries it, and suddenly freezes, as if he sensed something strange in the taste, unable to understand why. Then Mina asks Ed if the beans seem different today. He quickly replies that everything is fine, but as he takes a sip, he senses that it's not the broth that's changed, it's something around him that's different. The young man froze, feeling the taste of the food awaken forgotten memories. Aromas and spices from another world flash through his mind. A multitude of simple yet heartfelt dishes lay around, and he struggled to contain the overwhelming emotions. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He lay there, rubbing his eyes, thinking that life here was nothing but a trial. Mina slept peacefully next to him, and a moment later she quietly whispered something unintelligible in her sleep, as if she were dreaming a good dream. At dawn, Ray lay on the ground, watching Mina doze beside him and Celia rest nearby. Then he silently promised himself that one day he would escape this life of poverty, no matter the cost. Later, the boy and girl chatted near the rickety house in the bright sun, hoping that their mother would finally receive payment from her patients today. There was no work, but they believed that luck would still turn around.
Mina, smiling, said she was eating a cloud it was supposed to be filling.
Ed, perplexed, asked what she was doing, looking at her as if she were a child who had found a way to rejoice even in emptiness. Then he awkwardly called out to Mina, who turned around with a shy, slightly forced smile. In the distance, the two younger boys exchanged glances, hesitant to intervene in the older boy's strange conversation. In a burst of determination, Ray grabbed Mina's hand and pulled her away, insisting they were gone forever. Confused, she asked where exactly, but he didn't answer. Meanwhile, Ed was nearby, gathering wild herbs, when someone called out to him curiously. Ray explained that he was looking for edible plants, and Mina raised an eyebrow in surprise. He then added that grass isn't a vegetable, reminding her that Haikuen had once eaten something similar and been sick for a long time afterward. He was holding a bunch of greens, explaining the importance of knowing edible herbs, when a bug crawled across his hand. A squeal came from behind him, one of the girls screamed, recoiling in disgust. After this, the boy began to think that he should at least learn the basics of survival, since living hand-to-mouth requires resourcefulness. The girl chided him for not being so blunt, as some things can be said more gently. The girl insisted that Ed demonstrate the benefits of the plant he'd found. He, kneeling, explained haltingly, and a boy standing nearby asked, surprised, what was wrong with him. Ray frowned and examined the plant carefully, and suddenly a window appeared before his eyes with the inscription, Black Crow Pea, edible after cooking. Then he wondered, was this really a magical evaluation? The boy then showed the sprout to the girl, wondering if it would disappear and whether he could trust his own memory. He was tormented by the thought, was it a figment of his imagination or a strange power awakened within him? He decided there was no choice and suggested collecting other wild herbs similar to the one he'd found. The girl looked at him with disbelief, not believing that they were actually edible. She tried to warn him that such food could cause a stomach ache, but he firmly stated that he would try it first to make sure it was safe, and showed her the herbs, neatly wrapped in an apron. The girl poured rice into a cast-iron skillet, explaining that the young shoots could be cooked with the skins on. He then added a little rock salt, noting that complex cooking methods were impossible under their conditions. Lisa, standing nearby, reminded her that some beans contain a toxic protein, so they need to be heated thoroughly. After that, she looked thoughtfully into the fire, wondering if all this was safe. When the dish finally boiled and filled the air with steam, the boy said it would have been better with some seasoning. He compared the taste to peas, and the girl asked what he meant, barely suppressing a smile. Suddenly, two girls rushed at him, trying to snatch the food from his plate. Ray winced, and Mina, after trying a piece, grimaced, unable to hide the unpleasant taste. Then one of them cheerfully declared that the dish, though a little bitter, was still edible, and quickly began gobbling up the leftovers. The boy laughed, teasing her for her appetite, and toward evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, she asked if she could have more. He gently replied that it was best not to overeat, otherwise she'd get a stomachache in the morning. The girl apologized to Ed and Minya for the dinner, quietly raising her hand, as if embarrassed by her guilt. She wanted to say something else, but stopped, hesitating to continue, leaving a slight sense of awkwardness in the air. Ray noticed Mina, having overeaten, nodding off from sleepiness, and someone nearby gasped in surprise. The narrator remarked that his ability to observe and quickly assess a situation seemed inherited from a past, forgotten life. Late that evening, gazing at the starry sky, she reflected on her gift, how it could make life easier for those around her and bring joy to Mina. Now, for the first time, she felt she could be truly useful to someone. That night, near the wooden house, the child sadly apologized to Ed, saying they would have to leave. Ed's mother gently added that she couldn't stay and reminded her son to never give up, even if someone despised him for his dark hair. A little later, the man offered to exchange the item for coins and asked the boy if he really wanted to leave. Receiving an affirmative answer, he conveyed his request to take care of his child and then departed into the foggy night. The boy woke up confused, sweat pouring down his forehead, and next to him, a girl playfully touched his face with her foot, whispering his name. He didn't know whether to laugh or be angry, but his fatigue quickly gave way to a quiet laugh. At the gate, the guard loudly announced that work was over for the day and ordered everyone who couldn't stay to return home. The children were initially frightened, but realizing there was no danger, they exchanged relieved glances. The girl affectionately called the little black-haired boy dear, but the knight sternly warned him not to wander within the walls without permission. From a distance, two girls watched with concern and respect for the stern man. Later, the boy happily announced that they'd found work again, teasing the others to see if they were jealous. The girl, however, looked at him seriously, as if she saw his cheerful words not as bravado but as a desperate attempt to hide his fatigue.
Soon, Ray and Mina ran toward the gate, laughing.
Ray offered to take shelter with her, since the house technically belonged to her family. Celia, standing nearby, watched them go and quietly wondered if they were hiding fear behind a show of courage. In a wide valley at the foot of the mountains, a girl joyfully showed off a plant she'd found in the grass. A boy, looking at it, thought about the power of his beans, while nearby, another girl silently gathered grain, explaining she was only taking enough for one meal. Then the boy loudly pronounced the word assessment, and dozens of floating symbols flared around him. The air trembled with energy, as if nature itself were listening to his voice. Ray stood, amazed by the newly revealed ability to see the limits of his own desires.
Mina and her friend watched him, not hiding their curiosity and growing admiration.
After a while, he tiredly rubbed his temple and admitted that the magic was draining his body more than he'd expected. Mina anxiously asked if everything was alright, but he replied that it was nothing, it was better to focus on gathering food.
Along the way, they discussed the abundance of poisonous plants around and why slum dwellers avoid them.
However, some of them are actually edible, prompting one of the boys to enthusiastically confirm. Ray and the short-haired girl were examining herbs, discussing which ones were safe: greens, dandelion, wild onion, thyme. She noted with admiration that he was surprisingly knowledgeable for someone from the poor neighborhoods. Then the girl asked what Katmahu meant. The boy quickly retorted that he wasn't a great mage, only those who controlled the powers of evaluation. His voice held a mixture of embarrassment and cautious respect for the unknown judges of magic. Soon, the boy excitedly declared that Ed must be a hero with rare powers. The girl, however, warned him to keep it a secret and not take any risks, as he didn't yet fully understand what he was capable of. After that, she happily agreed to collect similar plants, and the boy suggested they do it together so they could get there before dark. There was a sense of unity in their words, as if their shared goal had brought them closer together. The boys walked briskly along the clearing, filling baskets with herbs. The boy jokingly remarked that the plants grew much better here than in the slums, where even salt was hard to come by. The girl smiled, noticing the odd shapes of some of the leaves and beckoning him to take a closer look. The boy cheerfully declared that today they would move forward and cook a truly delicious meal.
The girl happily echoed his sentiment, clapping her hands.
Then he pulled out the knife his mother had left behind, noting that even without knives, it was an indispensable item in the house. Ray admired the dexterity and grace of his movements as he wielded the tool. The others watched with curiosity as the boy confidently chopped wood, like a master accustomed to hard work. Then they began boiling the urku beans, skimming off the foam and discussing what dish they could make from them. One of the boys suggested grinding garlic leaves into a sauce, and the girl happily agreed to help, anticipating the flavorful result. When the food was ready, the boy marveled at the luxurious appearance of the dish and asked if it was too elaborate. Meanwhile, the girl greeted her father, and the other girl delightedly admitted that she, too, was amazed that the children had managed to do all this. Then everyone joined hands and thanked Rafili-sama for his blessing before the food grew cold. They wished each other bon appetit, and a cozy feeling of family permeated the house. Elia was the first to try the wild herb dish with garlic sauce and gasped in delight. The flavor was astonishing. The others, amazed, debated whether it really was a wild herb, remarking on the rich aroma and the perfect combination of ingredients. Then a discussion began about how this dish differed from the usual boiled ruko beans. It turned out that dandelion roots and polong beans were used here, giving the dish an unusual texture and crunch. One of the kids admired how even a simple seasoning didn't detract from the vibrant flavor. Afterwards, the whole group dined together, laughing and sipping hot soup. Someone explained that the beans were cooked directly in the broth, which gave the flavor a particularly mild flavor. They praised the dish and shared the clear mushroom soup, which was as warming as a campfire. One girl joyfully exclaimed that it was the first time she'd ever eaten such delicious food and wanted more. The woman sitting next to her looked at her in surprise, and the boy smiled and remarked that he hadn't expected such a confession from a child. Mina looked down and apologized to her mother, but she gently assured her that she didn't blame her daughter. Ray gently touched her hand, supporting her, and the boy, with a kind smile, said everything was fine, causing mild surprise among the others. Afterwards, everyone gathered around a large table laden with food. A girl with shining eyes declared that from now on they would eat delicious food every day, and the others enthusiastically followed suit, calling Ed their hero. They gathered again for breakfast, and someone cheerfully called everyone to get started. One of the boys thanked fate for having a full plate this morning, noting that it was all thanks to Ed. The blonde boy praised Ed's mother for raising her son well, but the dark-haired boy sharply retorted, declaring he was mistaken. His voice was unexpectedly firm, filling the room with tension. After a pause, the friends burst into laughter, teasing the man for earning too little. One called him harsh, while the other chuckled quietly, watching the joke ease the awkwardness. In a squalid house on the outskirts, a woman tended to an old man in the nurse's room while a child played on a straw bed. In the kitchenette, someone was quietly washing dishes, and the air was filled with the scent of herbs and damp wood. A man in a hooded cloak warned Ed and Minya not to venture too far into the dangerous forest. The two children cheerfully wished their father luck, encouraging him before leaving, and he grinned and waved goodbye. The boy paused for a moment before mentioning his father's side of the family. Then the hooded man smiled warmly, and the girl cautiously returned to the conversation, as if afraid of touching an old wound. Ray sat on the top of the hill, sighing heavily, lost in thoughts of his parents. Below, Elia was gathering herbs and flowers, and noticing his despondency, she called out cheerfully, trying to distract him from his gloomy thoughts. Elia proudly showed off the herbs she'd gathered, saying they'd now have a proper dinner again. The boy looked at her in surprise, and she added that she hoped Ed would recover if he ate properly. He laughed awkwardly, asking if he looked ill. The girl was embarrassed, thinking she might have said something stupid, but he thanked her warmly, calling her Minya, and she smiled, feeling that her concern had not been in vain. They sat on the top of the hill, enjoying the gentle breeze, and he gently said there was no point in missing their parents, they had Minya and the others, their new family. The girl frowned and objected that half of their wealth wasn't even edible, but he only laughed, calling it a trifle. Later, Mina approached an old man whose cough wouldn't subside and asked permission to examine him. Then, concentrating, she placed her palms on the sick man's chest and silently chanted a healing spell, filling the air with a gentle glow. When the spell broke, Mina gently asked the girl how she was feeling. She smiled and said the pain had subsided. At that moment, two children appeared at the door, announcing their return. The girl thanked Mina, who calmly told her to come again if the pain returned. Ray listened attentively when a girl standing nearby asked if the healer had been in recently. The woman nodded and replied that the patient's throat was still not feeling well, although it had improved somewhat. An old man nearby explained that the girl had bacterial laryngitis, and magic only alleviated the suffering. A complete cure, he said, was impossible in the slums. Ray paused, remembering a simple cure from the world he once lived in. Mirren was given a cup of steaming herbal infusion. She asked in surprise what it was, and the other girl wrinkled her nose, noting the strange smell. Then the boy explained that he had mixed antimicrobial herbs, and now the infusion was acting as a medicine. He added that dried leaves in the shade help manage lingering symptoms. The girl remarked on the refreshing taste, and the children nearby exchanged glances, some liked the drink, while others frowned at its tartness. The boy smiled, saying his throat felt much better after the tea. The woman replied with warm joy that she was glad to hear it, while the others watched from the door, hesitant to interrupt the moment. One of the boys awkwardly admitted he only wanted to help Mirren and her family. From behind the curtain, the girl remarked that the real credit went to Ed, but said it so quietly that only he heard. The young man offered to supply as much tea as needed, but the old man politely declined. Then the girl standing behind him remarked that such a drink would be expensive in her home country and nodded approvingly. Ed and the girl were walking through the narrow streets, and she asked where they were going. He explained that he was going to Doradin's shop to see if the herbs they'd found could be sold for any price. They knocked on the door, and the shopkeeper opened it with a smile. He happily exclaimed that he hadn't seen them in a while and asked if they had come for Ilku beans again, like before. Ed replied that this time he hadn't come to buy, but to ask for advice. The man was surprised why he wanted his opinion, and the girl stood nearby, listening attentively to the conversation. The boy then pulled out a small bag and asked if he could inspect the contents, explaining that it was tea. The owner unfolded the cloth, sniffed the aroma, and clarified that they had made it themselves, nodding respectfully. He invited them inside and added that his wife was in charge of the grocery store. The others exchanged glances of mild surprise, not expecting such hospitality from a merchant.
Ed approached two seated children who were whispering that they'd never been there before.
He suddenly called out to them, and both jumped in fright, quickly confirming that everything was fine. The man offered to sell the tea to them for sampling, if they were willing. The little helper hesitantly agreed, and soon two children rose to hang the sign at the entrance as the sun was setting. The girl carefully hung the herbs to dry, and the boy thoughtfully asked whether it was even worthwhile to start selling herbal tea. He decided that a test batch would show results and asked where Ed was. The girl waved her hand, explaining that he was working nearby. A little later, two teenagers asked the stranger why he had come to their neighborhood. The man greeted them and said he wanted to learn the process of making tea, which would now be sold under their name. He explained in detail how to properly process the leaves, and the boy breathed a sigh of amazement when he heard that from that day on, tea would officially become their new product. The man said he wanted to sell the boys tea in his shop and asked if he could supply it regularly. Ed froze in surprise, then realized with astonishment that the leaves he had thought were ordinary were actually quite a valuable commodity. They discussed how the aromatic herbal tea, despite its high price, was selling quickly thanks to its elegant packaging and free samples, which impressed customers. The shop owner spoke confidently, as if he'd already seen the product's success. When the man suggested formalizing their partnership, the boy enthusiastically agreed. They shook hands warmly, and this gesture marked the beginning of a new venture, filled with hope and excitement. The girl joyfully announced that the deal was done, and the people standing nearby exchanged glances, not fully understanding what was happening. Their surprise only heightened the atmosphere of excitement and joy around them. Soon, the entire group excitedly asked Ed for a handshake, as if wanting to share his good fortune. He admitted he wasn't entirely sure what had happened, but he shook hands with everyone anyway, while someone handed him a package, and others laughed, saying that now everyone wanted to buy his tea. The man handed over the bag, explaining that it was payment for the tea sold and in advance on future deliveries. However, the girl frowned and declared it counterfeit, leaving him completely confused. Minya confidently said that real coins should be brown, but she was corrected, this one was silver. The girl blinked in confusion, and someone off to the side added that one such coin was worth more than their weekly salary. That day, Mr. Doridan personally handed Ed and Minya their next payment. They jumped with joy as they counted the coins, and then the girl playfully called out to him, the short, black-haired man, and they left the shop laughing. A boy he knew stopped Ray on the street and asked him in surprise why he was leaving a store he was rumored no longer employed at. Ray scratched his head awkwardly and admitted he'd just been helping out inside. Nearby, a girl holding a fire sign looked at the noisy group with confusion and muttered whether they were starting another fight. Nearby, two boys were already arguing loudly, one demanding they come over immediately and not talk back to the older man. Two boys ran down an alley, and one of them shouted that black hair brings poverty and the curse of the slums. The girl, hearing this, snapped that it was just a silly fairy tale, while the crowd around cheered on the ringleader, a man named Harris. Ed grabbed the offender by the collar and demanded proof he wasn't lying. The boy thrashed, trying to break free, and the third one shouted at Ed to stop, but he clenched his teeth and repeated that he hated such words. Elia ran in, loudly ordering everyone to stop. Her voice cut through the din of the street, and the boys froze, stunned by her determination as she stepped between them, preventing the fight from continuing. Lania suddenly appeared, and everyone turned. Someone shouted her name loudly, startled by her sudden appearance, and she stepped forward confidently, as if she knew she had to intervene. Lania declared that she wouldn't allow the argument to continue, and if Ed didn't defend himself, she would confront the bully herself. Her gaze was firm, and even the bullies backed off, sensing the strength of her resolve. After a tense pause, Mina approached Ed and asked if everything was okay. He waved her off, saying they should just forget it all and leave. One of the boys grumbled discontentedly that all this fuss was a complete hassle. Another guy admitted that he wasn't cut out to deal with violence, and the next second, the girl suddenly hugged her friend so tightly that she just screamed in surprise, not understanding what was happening. The little sorceress Lania, who hailed from the same slums, received thanks for her help. Another girl told Minya to stop being dramatic, and the boy assured everyone he was simply passing by looking for a part-time job. Liza asked Lania if she made any money using fire magic. She modestly admitted that she didn't make much, and someone added that they were now more comfortable paying with Ilku beans than spending coins. Ray showed the silver coins to the stunned girl, who couldn't believe he had so much money. While she looked on in bewilderment, the other girl just smiled quietly, and Ray calmly began to explain where it all came from. Ray thoughtfully noted that many of those living in the slums had once been ordinary city dwellers. He admitted that he had never even considered gathering wild herbs before. His mother always said that food was what people bought. The others listened to him from the hill, sensing the bitter truth hidden within his words. Then Elia reminded them that Master Guido had assured them that as long as they stayed within the city, everything was safe. However, Mina anxiously recalled the snakes and wolves. Ray, trying to distract them from their conversation about fears, asked curiously what exactly she wanted to show him. Soon, Ray joyfully shouted that he'd found another mushroom and, beaming, raised the find above his head. The others gathered around, amazed by his enthusiasm, as if he'd discovered a treasure. Ray and Mina examined the oddly shaped mushroom closely. Mina marveled at how juicy it looked, but Ray was dubious. Then he noticed a barely discernible mark on the stem. It turned out to be a poisonous doppelganger of the older mushroom. Ed showed his mushroom to the others and calmly explained that this species was edible. One of the girls praised his observation, while another asked in surprise how he could tell them apart, since they all looked the same. Ed simply quietly asked them not to tell anyone about it. A cheerful girl handed Ed another mushroom and asked if he should take it. He immediately shook his head, declining. Nearby, two boys were discussing another mushroom, deciding it was perfectly acceptable, and nodded approvingly. One of the boys announced that Mr. Doridan was willing to buy mushrooms for a decent price. The girls were excited to gather more and happily decided to return with full baskets. Inspired, the girls enthusiastically declared themselves a team of explorers under Minya's command. One admitted she was a little nervous, while another happily declared it was like a treasure hunt, and everyone burst into laughter. Ed cheerfully proclaimed Lania a great sage and fire mage, but stumbled over Minya. Then the others hastened to assure her that they valued her for who she was, even without any special talents. Upon returning, they proudly showed off their bountiful mushroom harvest, looking forward to the upcoming dinner. Someone suggested they go cook, while another remembered that Lania would be arriving that evening and would also share the meal. But suddenly Mina said, alarmed, that she didn't know the way back. Rhea tried to calm her down, advising them to use the sun and the trees as a guide, and Dan soon spotted the path they'd taken, though a slight rustling in the bushes made everyone tense. Ray ordered them to move slowly and stay together. Mina flinched at a strange sound from her side, and the two girls behind him hesitantly intertwined their fingers, trying to keep up. Suddenly, a goblin-like creature leaped out in front of them, wielding a curved knife. A glowing mark on its chest read "Small Monster." Ray and Mina froze in fear as it approached. The next moment, the goblin lunged forward, and Ray shouted for everyone to run. The group dashed through the tall grass, barely managing to look back. But suddenly, Ray tripped, noticing something strange right in front of him. At that moment, the brave girl raised her hands, creating a burst of fire, and screamed that she wouldn't let Ed come to harm. The flames roared and struck the goblin, causing him to stagger back and crumble into ashes. Ed, breathing heavily, grabbed his weapon and engaged the monster, while the two girls cheered him on enthusiastically, amazed by his determination. When the enemy fell, everyone cried out in joy, sensing victory. One of the girls, losing her strength and magic, desperately called out to Ed, begging him not to die. He looked up, struck by her sincere cry, and for the first time in a long time, he felt tears in his eyes. Then Ed, mustering his will, delivered the decisive blow. The blade sank into the monster's chest, and it collapsed with a piercing howl. His gaze hardened, determined to see the fight through. A knife marked with the blessed symbol suddenly glowed in Ed's hands. The girls ran over to check if it was intact, but he denied having done anything himself and suggested they discuss it later, once they were out of here. Ray had just managed to urge everyone to focus on escape when 3 more goblins appeared, each armed with a crude club. They were surrounded, and panic swept through the group again, making their hearts beat faster. An avalanche of monsters erupted from the depths of the demonic world, rushing toward the northern border town of Eldania, which belonged to the kingdom of Melria. The torrent of beasts swept away everything in its path, bringing death and destruction to this once peaceful land. Terror gripped the villages, people fled in panic from the monsters, amid raging fires and smoke. The narrator mentioned that Eldania was isolated, and the political instability in Melria had caused local lords to delay sending reinforcements. Despite the despair of the villagers, a group of armed men stood on the hill in the pouring rain. Their silhouettes stood out against the gray sky, and behind them were camels and horsemen, ready for battle. The map shows the northwest of the kingdom of Melria, the cities of Eldania and Tree, the Elda and Melria rivers, the Hellhorn mountains and the ominous lands of the demon realm, shrouded in a thick miasma. The squad encountered 3 monsters, and the boy, realizing the gravity of the situation, shouted at the others not to turn around. He declared that he would hold off the enemies to give his friends a chance to escape, while the girls looked at him with fear and alarm. Ed desperately ordered the others to run, while the roars of the monsters echoed behind him. Mina called his name, and he clutched his knife, preparing for the final blow, screaming as if commanding himself to survive. Ray rushed forward with fury, repelling the goblin's attack. His blade flashed in the air, and one of his opponents fell dead, but others rushed after him, roaring with anger and fear. Suddenly, a sturdy young man with a spear and a stern gaze emerged from the trees. He warned the children that it was dangerous to wander in the forest and asked if they were safe. One of the boys thanked him for saving them, while the others stood behind, not daring to look up. Soon the children shouted joyfully, recognizing each other, but then they heard a stern voice. An adult man scolded them for going so far from the city, reminding them that they could have died without realizing the danger. Ray asked firmly if they understood how serious this was. Mina and the boy exchanged worried glances. Then Dan stepped forward, hugged them both, and quietly apologized, glad that everyone was alive despite the lack of food and constant danger. Dan explained that they were tracking monsters and accidentally stumbled upon the children. Mina asked if they were hunting goblins, and the other man mentioned that he was acting on behalf of a local lord, investigating monster activity. The girl was surprised to learn that her father was engaged in such work. He smiled and admitted that he had been doing this even before the children were born, recalling the old story of the invasion that destroyed Eldania. One of the boys added that many survivors from Eldania now live in their own slums. The man confirmed that creatures from the demonic world are powerful enough to wipe out entire cities. The young man explained that their master was being extremely cautious and taking no unnecessary risks. Meanwhile, the others discussed the slain goblins and wondered where the last one had come from. During the conversation, someone mentioned that Ed had once fought 3 of them at once and been defeated. The man ordered the children to stand back and covered his face with his mask, preparing to inspect the bodies of his enemies. Ray explained that the monsters from the demonic world were poisoned by miasma. A small amount was harmless, but prolonged contact was fatal. He warned everyone not to touch them, even out of curiosity. 2 men explained that 8 years had passed, but the settlers from Eldania still couldn't return home. The miasma left behind by the invasion still contaminated the land. The 3 children listened silently, unable to believe the disaster had lasted so long. The masked man took out a magical stone and handed it to the boy, warning him not to touch it with his bare hands. The girls standing nearby watched warily, and the man praised them for their first successful foray. The fallen slimes lay at the edge of the clearing. One of the fighters remarked that nature would deal with their bodies, then ordered everyone to return to the city. At that moment, the boy quietly called out to Ed, as if seeking confirmation that he was alive. Lania, feeling guilty, quietly apologized for dragging them into danger. But Ed shook his head, insisting that it wasn't right to say that. He should have been more careful. The girl admitted she had been mistaken in her judgment of the boy. Previously, she had considered him cowardly and constantly the target of ridicule, but now she realized he was the only one who dared to stand alone against the monsters. Then she apologized sincerely, squeezing his hand in gratitude. Her eyes shone with gratitude for his protection of her and Minya, and for the first time, there was genuine respect in her voice. After that, the group, laughing and chatting, ran toward the distant city walls. The girl joyfully cried out that they were finally back, and Ed wearily remarked that the day had been far too long. As the sun was setting, the man called Ed, Minya, and Lanya over to talk. He was worried they were putting themselves in danger again, and the children listened silently, standing in the wind and the muted light of the evening sky. He reasoned that he couldn't stop them from gathering food, since they lived outside the fortress walls and faced the threat of monsters every day. Poverty and a lack of resources left them little choice. The boy then suggested talking to Mama so she could teach them the necessary techniques so they could help Ed and Lanya whenever needed. The girl hesitated, hesitantly saying she didn't know if she could handle the lessons. The boy, smiling, assured Minya that she would succeed with magic. He showed her a glowing screen, where the word blessed appeared next to her name, and added that she was truly talented. The girl happily promised to do everything she could to justify the trust. The others exchanged glances and, smiling, supported her. After all, if Ed believed her, it meant it was worth it. They soon reached the gates, where a group of children anxiously asked if they could enter. The man at the entrance kindly confirmed this, explaining that the guild always welcomes new adventurers, even young ones, and invited them inside. Half a month earlier, the man had told 2 people that magic stones were impossible to buy in the area, only the guild dealt with them. Then one of the men, surprised, asked what kind of organization that was. At the entrance to the building, a man in armor turned around in surprise when another addressed him, asking him to show the children the way. 2 children watched the conversation, exchanging quiet glances. They soon entered a noisy tavern, filled with drunken voices and the smell of ale. One of their companions explained that this was where they bought magical stones, while the other winced, noting the strong smell of alcohol. Mina asked Ed if he was nervous. He admitted he was a little uneasy, there were too many strangers around. Muffled voices could be heard in the corner, whispering about his black hair and an old curse. The girl gently encouraged Ed, telling him he could handle it because she was there. He nodded, wondering what they would say about him this time, while nearby someone was already asking what was going on. Soon, a broad-shouldered man approached them and eyed them suspiciously, asking why the children from the slums had come here and why one of them had black hair. The boys hesitated, shifting their weight. Then the cheerful girl loudly announced that Minya's team had come to sell the magic stone. The 2 men at the counter exchanged surprised glances, one doubted their words, but the other confirmed that the children had indeed defeated the goblin. The adults perked up, vying with each other to praise the little ones. They called them brave and skillful, but the children stood there, smiling sheepishly, unable to believe the adults genuinely admired them. The children excitedly asked Lanya how she'd managed to do such a thing, admiring her magic and Ed's skill with a knife. The adults also teased her, demanding to share their good fortune, while the girl waved her hands sheepishly. A cheerful elderly man raised his mug, loudly calling the boy a future hero and proposing a toast to the little monster hunters. The entire tavern erupted in a joyful roar, and the mugs clanged against each other. One of the boys timidly asked the old man if his black hair looked strange. He replied that it was rare in his country, then added thoughtfully that there was an old folktale that such darkness on the head was a curse. The heroes watched with admiration as the noisy gathering of representatives of various races unfolded. Among those present were elves with delicate ears, bearded dwarves, colossal giants, diminutive halflings, dragon-blooded humans, and beastmen. Each looked unique, and the boys couldn't hide their amazement at such diversity. Then the boy teased the bearded man, saying that if black hair meant a curse, then someone with such a beard was cursed 10 times more. The man and his wolf laughed along and remarked that outside the city, no one cared about hair color. The girl approached Ed, noticing his confusion, and gently said she was just nervous. She then explained that they needed to speak to the clerk on the 2nd floor to sell the magic stone. Ed thanked her with a slight smile, feeling the tension ease. Meanwhile, at the other end of the room, a man was being loudly reprimanded for his negligence. 2 girls watched the scene from behind the railing, trying not to be seen. Soon, a stern woman in glasses snapped at someone who tried to intervene in the conversation. Mina and her companions cautiously made their way to the exit, but Celia blocked their path, claiming they were the ones who had caused the commotion earlier.
The group froze in surprise when she suddenly mentioned the elf. Then an excited girl ran up to them and passionately declared that the boy was a purebred, judging by his hair and facial features. The others were confused, not understanding what she was talking about, and one of them tried to stop her. The two little children asked why she was so kind to Minya, and the older man, with a kind smile, explained that elves always attach great importance to origin and purity of blood. The old merchant sitting at the counter explained that he sold knowledge and assessed bloodlines. The girl learned that the elven receptionist was highborn, with a bloodline purity of about 70%, which greatly surprised her. The elderly elf showed interest not in the girl, but in the black-haired boy. He reassured him, saying he didn't believe in curses, and then gently asked where he was born and who his parents were. The old man asked Ed if he'd ever heard the story of how his hair color came to be. The boy admitted he had no idea, and then the elf offered to tell him something important. An elderly man in glasses explained that the legend of children with black hair bringing disasters is not a fairy tale at all, but a distorted reflection of ancient events based on real facts. The silver-haired woman added that history had been distorted over time, and the black-haired hero who had once saved the world had become the cause of disaster in the retellings. While Ed and Mina listened, the purple-haired girl asked the elder to appraise the magic stone, and he readily agreed. The old man explained that although black hair doesn't confer any special cursed powers, people can still be prejudiced. Meanwhile, the girl happily noted that she had received 5 silver coins after a successful deal. Ed was hurrying down the stairs, apologizing for being late, when someone from above called out Maklasia's name and asked Mr. Hophelm what he wanted. Several people watched the scene from the balcony, exchanging glances. The old man ordered the girl to send a messenger to the Lord, and then the black-haired boy excitedly reported that he had found another black-haired child in the slums of True. One of the guards reported to the Lord that a message had arrived from Lord Hophelm. The letter contained a report from the Adventurers Guild, and the ruler immediately showed interest in the news. The knight reported to his commander that a boy with black hair had been found in the slums. The man frowned, intrigued, while a girl hid behind the curtain, quietly whispering that hair like that only existed in fairy tales. Meanwhile, Mina was healing her wound, and the others watched her actions with admiration. One of them exclaimed that she was a true healer, capable of healing anyone, and the girl shyly agreed. Inspired, Mina suggested Ed intentionally injure himself so she could use magic again. He laughed and declined, while Ray noted dubiously that the day's harvest had been rather meager. Ed then began to wonder if the wild plants belonged to anyone, and Mina suspected that someone had found their place and was now harvesting them early. Meanwhile, another girl anxiously grabbed his hand, noticing human footprints nearby. At an old wooden house, a girl worriedly said that someone had eaten something strange, but the boy angrily denied it. Then another girl explained that he had simply imitated Ed by trying wild mushrooms, causing alarm among everyone. He quietly wondered if Mirren was having a hard time, and the two girls holding the basket decided that they needed to collect more. The current amount was clearly not enough for everyone. Ray hummed a cheerful song about adventure and discovery as the group made their way along the narrow path. When the path suddenly reached a dead end, Mina noticed it was impossible to climb, but Ray suddenly pointed ahead, saying he saw something interesting. They found a tiny hole in the rock, and one of the girls excitedly suggested they climb in, hoping there might be treasure hidden inside. But the other quickly called out to her, demanding she stop. After a brief hesitation, the group decided to enter. Nina stepped into the darkness of the narrow passage, hoping there would be no monsters inside. Someone playfully promised to protect Ed, and a cheerful song about treasure and brave adventurers began to play behind them. After a while, the group emerged from the cave. The girl cried out excitedly that this was definitely the way out, and sang a verse about escaping to a place without monsters. The others stared in amazement at the view. At the edge of the clearing, they spotted a huge, vibrant fruit tree. One of the boys guessed it was a wild apple tree and offered Minya the first fruit she could try. The girl took a bite, her eyes lighting up. The taste was amazing. She delightedly praised the juicy sweetness, and the boy, smiling, said that this sensation was called sweet. He offered her a raspberry nearby, and she confessed that she had never seen such berries before. Ray, Mina, and Celia sat under a tree, admiring the view. Ray remarked that the place was like paradise, Mina called it a true treasure, and Celia explained that the fruit trees here survive thanks to the cliffs protecting the valley. The boy remarked that the hole was too narrow for adults to fit through, so it was their secret hideout. The girl laughed when he patted her head and happily agreed to keep the secret. The conversation then turned to Eldania, a region once renowned for its orchards. Now it's in ruins, and fresh fruit is a rarity. The girl mused that perhaps Mr. Doridon would pay good money for their discovery. However, another countered that the fruit was already overripe and would spoil quickly, as it was out of season. She worried that everything would go to waste if she didn't sell it in time. At that moment, a woman with a baby on her back approached the house and joyfully announced her return. The children recognized her and, with cries of joy, ran to greet her, embracing their mother after a long absence. The woman explained that she had come to help Marin because the clinic had become overcrowded. She thanked Ed and Minya for caring for Lania and for the mushrooms, which had proven so helpful. Friends cheerfully reported finding a whole basket of fruit today. One of them suggested making jam before the berries spoiled and proudly showed off their fresh, fragrant harvest. Ray explained that boiling the fruit to remove the moisture would keep it fresh longer, as this would prevent bacteria from growing. Mina listened with interest, adding that it would taste better with sugar, but she couldn't find any. Then one of the girls suggested using honey instead of sugar, saying that they had done so before, and the resulting jam was sold in Tria and neighboring villages. The boy was surprised to hear that this brought in a good income. Since none of the children knew how to make jam, they asked their aunt to help. She agreed with a smile and told them how she used to make it in Eldania, back when the trees still bore fruit every year. The inspired boy promised to go to Mr. Doridon for honey. The girls happily agreed, reminding him to also ask about storage jars and adding that Minya would definitely go with him. That evening, Mina, jumping out of the tree, burst into loud laughter, and the others hurried to her. Tired but content, they walked back with baskets, then cooked dinner by the fire. The girl playfully hit Ed on the arm, laughing at the aroma of food filling the air. The three boys happily ate the jam, admiring its sweetness. One of them said the taste was simply magical, while the other added that with such a flavor, it would definitely sell well at the market. The boy excitedly announced that the first jar had already been sold. He then described how fruit had become rare after the loss of Elvania, and the others joyfully celebrated their success right there in the shop, sharing laughter and delight. Later, he remarked that it was a shame there was only a little apple jam left. The girl reminded him that there was still a whole year until the next harvest, and another handed him a small bag, saying it was his honestly earned share. When they opened the bag, everyone froze. There was more money than they expected. The group began arguing about what to do with it. Some joked that Minya would buy all the Urku beans in the area, while others suggested there were enough coins to fill an entire room. Then Mina calmly said that the reward should be spent wisely. After all, it was the fruit of their efforts. She advised them to buy only what they really wanted, and the two little ones listened attentively until someone's hand gently squeezed the others in agreement. The boy reminded them that they lived in the slums and needed almost everything, so they had to choose carefully. The girl admitted she didn't know what she wanted most. It seemed both difficult and exciting at the same time. Then the other girl asked, smiling, what she would buy first. Elia laughingly replied that Minya simply dreamed of a good meal. Everyone laughed, and one of the boys remarked that sometimes a trip to a good tavern makes life much more pleasant. Ray said he was grateful for the opportunity to eat delicious food every day since he and Ed started gathering supplies. Elia added wistfully that she wished days like these would never end, which briefly surprised him. The next morning, their group received praise for their new adventure gear. One of the boys cheerfully declared that they would definitely return for another expedition, and the shopkeeper gave the children a pep talk as they joyfully ran out the door. At that moment, a girl with curly hair and a lace dress approached Ed, smiling slyly. She said that it turned out the black-haired boy really did exist. The same girl, with mild surprise, said she didn't believe the rumors until she saw him with her own eyes. Ed and the two boys standing behind him tensed, unsure what to expect from the stranger. Three children huddled together as a tall girl with long hair explained how black-haired children were said to bring disaster and force people to band together to drive out the cursed child. The girl with wavy hair intervened, saying they'd all heard these stories many times and suffered through the gossip. She then added that she wasn't so naive as to believe such nonsense or blame it for their misfortunes. The twin ponytailed girl thoughtfully explained that the legend's origins were murky and were likely invented to frame innocent black-haired people. The others listened in silence, and someone sighed heavily, calling the story complete nonsense. The girl awkwardly apologized for judging him by his appearance earlier. Ed asked why she called him then, and she replied that she'd simply wanted to see if he knew where Mr. Doradin's shop was nearby. Meanwhile, the Count, along with his wife Cassie and two daughters, Mariel and Eleanor, stood before a massive castle, ruling the northwestern lands of the Kingdom of Merlia. Their domain was visible far beyond the city walls. In a spacious room overlooking the city, a man at a long table examined a jar of apple jam and inquired where it came from. The servant replied that it came from a shop in the castle town, and reminded him that they had recently purchased some exquisite tea there. The two girls looked at the sticky jam with disgust, and the man laughed, saying they were just trying it for the first time. He then sadly noted that Eldania had been destroyed before Eleanor was born, 8 years ago. One of the sisters took a hesitant bite of the sandwich and frowned, but the other encouraged her, saying that there was no point in judging until you tried it properly, it would taste better than it looked. Then the younger girl suddenly flared up and reproached her father for hiding delicious food from them. The man, confused, retorted that he wasn't hiding anything and explained that he'd gotten everything he could find this time. The cheerful Minya enthusiastically offered to show Eleanor the way, and she politely thanked him, introducing herself with a slight smile. Two more people walked leisurely behind them, glancing around as they made their way through the busy city streets. Soon, one of the escorts noticed the locals looking at them strangely. One quietly mentioned Lady Eleanor's name, and another asked in surprise what such a noblewoman was doing in such a place. The girls admired Eleanor's outfit, saying she looked like a true princess. She modestly replied that it was just one of her simple dresses. Then Minya, beaming with joy, showed off her new, worn-out clothes, and everyone unanimously agreed that they suited her wonderfully. As they entered the building, Nina joyfully announced their arrival. The others commented on her kindness and good manners, watching as she politely apologized for the inconvenience before moving on. At that moment, the boy called loudly to Ed, demanding to urgently sell him some apple jam, and suspiciously inquired why he was standing next to the unfamiliar woman. Ed calmly explained that they were simply seeing her off after she asked for directions. A girl's voice demanded attention from the shop, and the man behind the counter nervously inquired whether the important person before him was incognito. He then politely informed her that all the jam had already been sold out and no new deliveries were expected. A girl with a headband offered to share some jam with Ieli-chan. Another asked if there was any left at home, and the boy confirmed that they had 2 or 3 jars. This greatly surprised the girl with the headband, who immediately offered to take them home with her. Having thanked Doradin for his help, the boys hurried away. Behind them, 2 villagers whispered excitedly, discussing whether it was Lady Eleanor herself, the Earl's youngest daughter, and whether they should now report her visit to the castle. Along the way, Eleanor cheerfully thanked them for the rare and expensive jam, remarking that her new acquaintances must have very wealthy families to have so many jars. These words caused confusion and light laughter among the children. Soon the group found themselves in a rundown neighborhood. One of the girls mentioned the name Rainierta with alarm, another frowned, surveying the surroundings, and a third remembered that this was precisely the place they'd recently mentioned, the slums where refugees lived. Meanwhile, in the luxurious room, a conversation was taking place about Rainierta's plight. One of the advisors was saying that charity could not be endless, and the cost of aid was draining the treasury. Behind the door, 2 girls heard these words and exchanged astonished glances. The blonde man spoke irritably about the problem he had inherited from his father, and the girl standing next to him sighed heavily, feeling the tension in the air. On the streets, children gazed at Eleanor with admiration, whispering that she must be a rich girl from the capital. A boy quickly intervened, explaining that she was simply Minya's guest and apologizing for the chatty children. Elia thought as she passed the slums, remembering how often people had judged the refugees and complained about the crisis. As the children waved goodbye, she caught herself wondering why Minya had brought her here. Approaching the old house, Mina proudly announced that they had arrived at Minya and Ed's home. Eleanor paused in amazement, expecting to see a mansion, and couldn't believe they actually lived in this ramshackle shack. When they entered, Celia was surprised to see a city girl in their home, but immediately greeted her warmly. She admitted that, compared to the streets, it was much cleaner here than one might expect. Celia noted that the dwelling turned out to be much tidier than she had expected, and Lisa, looking at the shelves, was surprised by the number of books neatly arranged along the walls. In front of the dilapidated building, one of the women acknowledged that it was not the best place to work, but added that hospitals were needed where there were sick people, regardless of the situation. The girl asked if she was doing all this for money. The woman gently replied that everyone here just wanted to live happily and healthily. Then another girl called for Eli-chan to follow her, leading her further into the courtyard. When Eleanor received the jar of jam, Mina gasped in surprise, not believing they actually had it. Another girl asked why a poor family from the slums needed such an expensive delicacy, and the boy calmly explained that they made it themselves. The group happily confirmed they'd prepared everything themselves. Then the boy explained that they'd had to travel beyond the plains and forest, as there was nothing to forage in the slums, and only there were they able to find the necessary fruits. The conversation turned to the northern forest, where, according to the boys, they nearly died after encountering goblins. One of them admitted that he was sure they wouldn't make it out alive, and now every foray feels like a victory. Later, sitting together on the roof of the house, they discussed how they survive, cooking from wild plants, brewing herbal tea, and making fruit jam. Someone remarked that, despite the difficulties, they were all essentially the same age, and that this brought them closer together. Two girls said it was the jam that helped them become friends with Eleanor. They admitted that Minya doesn't like herbal tea, but if you add a little sweetness, the flavor becomes mild. Eleanor tried the drink and noted its delicate aroma. The girl thanked her friends for their efforts and offered to pay them for the jar of jam. At that moment, armed soldiers approached the house, spotted her on the roof, and loudly called out to Lady Eleanor, stunning everyone present. Eleanor, without missing a beat, confidently declared that she had come there of her own free will and demanded respect for her friends. The two people standing nearby looked at her decisiveness in surprise, realizing that her secret identity had been revealed. She then calmly introduced herself as the Count's youngest daughter and the future ruler of Tree. The group froze in shock, and one of the girls quietly apologized to Minya for not telling her sooner. As the sun set, everyone stood together, and one of the women thanked fate for a day full of discoveries. She admitted that she had previously known little about life in the slums, but now she saw the hidden dignity and strength of the people living there. Elia said with delight that she believed this radiance would change all of Rainierta, but Ray asked thoughtfully whether the changes would affect the slums themselves and whether hope alone would be enough to escape poverty. Later, Ray distributed food to children at the gate, explaining that everyone received an equal share, regardless of age. Someone asked to save some for the Cern family, whose child was sick, and the others nodded approvingly, deciding to help. At the gate, the boy waved goodbye to the children, promising to see them tomorrow. They responded cheerfully, running along the road until they disappeared around the bend. Returning home, he joyfully announced that he had brought beans, but upon opening the door, he saw his grandmother collapsed on the floor. In a panic, he rushed to her, calling her name, and hurried for help. Celia quickly cast a healing spell, and Mira whispered to make the pain go away. The boy asked if everything was okay, and the old woman admitted she'd simply tripped, her legs weren't working anymore at her age. After finishing her treatment, the woman said the bone was set and she needed to rest for a week. The grandmother was surprised at how quickly everything had gone, and on the street, a young girl anxiously promised to find a way to get food until she recovered. Later, Ray wondered if it was even possible to change Rainierta's poverty. Mina expressed hope that things would improve with time. He silently watched as the woman and child left, while the girl behind them joyfully announced that their business was finished. Across the street, Harris noticed a gun on his companion's belt and remarked on it. The man was surprised to see a familiar face, and a third man standing nearby tried to offer him money, but Harris sharply told him to shut up. The boy refused the handouts, firmly declaring that he had already found a way to make money. His companion suggested selling magic stones, pointing to a nearby building with a sign of crossed axes hanging above the door. Ray asked if she was alone today and where her pure-blooded friend was. The girl sheepishly replied that Minya was currently working at the clinic, and that she had come in her place, trying to speak confidently, though her voice trembled slightly. Meanwhile, the burly man was preparing for his patrol and noted that everyone was busy today. The girl, overhearing the conversation, learned of a gang that had infiltrated Tree, and the other soldiers reported that their areas had already been cleared. A woman nearby explained that southern cities were plagued by gangs of robbers recruiting street children, some becoming bait, others the victims. The girl listened silently, while another added a warning: these days, scammers even operate under the guise of benefactors. Ray reminded Minya to be careful, as the receptionist had advised, but she confidently replied that everything was under control. The others exchanged distrustful glances and hastened to reassure her that it wasn't safe at all, as the warning hadn't been random. One girl remarked to another that she was too kind and trusting. The other, holding a cup in her hands, looked thoughtfully away, thinking about the rumors about bandits and feeling a slight uneasiness that wouldn't leave her. Ed was worried about Harris's words, but he firmly stated that he had already found a way to make money. When asked what was bothering him, he reluctantly admitted that he was still thinking about something disturbing and couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding. Soon, a worried girl ran up to them and shouted that Harris was nowhere to be found. The dark-haired boy frowned and said something was wrong, causing the others to instantly tense up and listen intently. The boy cautiously suggested that Harris might have gotten involved with bandits. The girl immediately shut up, shocked and alarmed by the possibility that their friend had become embroiled in such a dangerous undertaking. She said his conversation about money was particularly alarming. The boy agreed and offered to find it as soon as possible, while the other girl firmly stated that even poverty couldn't justify bad behavior. After a brief discussion, everyone decided to act immediately. They hurried to the city gates, where one of the boys anxiously scanned the crowd, while the others questioned passers-by, trying to find any clues. In conversation with the lookout, they learned that someone had recently entered the city. One of them remembered who Harris usually hangs out with and remarked that it all seemed suspicious, as if he was up to something. Suddenly, Mina cried out joyfully that she'd heard someone say Harris's name. The other two recognized the voices of Uru and Robbie from the slums, and Mina, without hesitation, ran there, calling for the others to follow her. Ray overheard a conversation about plans to raid the mansion that night. Upon hearing this, his friends realized in horror that Harris was indeed up to something and called him reckless for organizing everything so quickly. The dark-haired boy panicked and yelled at Harris to run and stick to the plan, but Harris ran into the barefoot boy, who sarcastically asked what business they were on together now. Ray sternly warned them not to do anything stupid. Mina and another girl looked on with concern, but the blonde boy merely chuckled, assuring them they'd misunderstood. Ray accused him of planning a robbery for the gang, and Mina confirmed that she had heard the entire conversation. Upon hearing this, the boy turned pale and couldn't hide his shock. One of the boys firmly declared that he would deal with Harris, instructing Lania to capture the two escaped children. But they, screaming that they wouldn't give in, turned and ran away as fast as they could. Lania called out to Ed, but he, flushed with anger, accused everyone of interfering with his life. He shouted that it was because of him, the black-haired one, that misfortunes always happened, as if trying to convince himself of his own curse. Two guys came face to face. One urged the other to draw his weapon, declaring he wouldn't back down, while the other shouted that he urgently needed money and was tired of watching others get away with it. In a rage, Ray punched the dark-haired boy, who shouted back that there was no such thing as a curse. A fight ensued, and Ray realized with bitterness that for the first time, someone had dared to fight back. Off to the side, two boys frightenedly asked Lania what to do, suggesting setting the place on fire to create a distraction. But the girl, terrified, shouted to Harris that this was madness and would only make matters worse. Suddenly, a group led by a determined young man approached them. A cheerful girl with them announced that she had managed to bring help, which surprised the dark-haired boy, who was already at a loss as to how to get out of it. Later, the elder thanked the two boys for their help in capturing the bandits and presented them with a reward. A woman nearby explained that Harris had cleverly deceived the bandits, pretending to be their ally, and lured them right into a trap. The two girls discussed the boy's abilities with relief, glad he hadn't been involved in any nefarious activities. Meanwhile, the boy himself quietly moved away, unnoticed by the surprised girl standing nearby. Harris froze in confusion when his interlocutor firmly stated that he had misunderstood and would never have helped bandits. Realizing his mistake, Harris sheepishly apologized for his mistrust. The fair-haired boy shouted an indignant objection, but the armed man stopped him, reminding him that they should work together despite their differences. The dark-haired boy asked, perplexed, what they had in common. Harris encouraged everyone to work together and distributed today's share of the coins to the assembled children. He sternly reminded everyone not to rush, as everyone would receive the same amount, regardless of age. Mina hesitated to teach Harris how to brew medicinal tea. Ray calmly agreed, but noted that they didn't have enough people to grow herbs consistently, rather than harvest them repeatedly. He noticed a crowd of happy kids had gathered around Harris, listening to him as a leader. Smiling, Ray noted that he was clearly winning the kids' trust, and then asked what Ed was staring at so intently. Harris coolly said he had no intention of thanking Eddie. Ed calmly replied that he didn't expect gratitude, as the spirit of mutual assistance was what mattered, precisely what Harris himself was currently demonstrating. Gradually, everyone began to notice the changes. No one called Harris the short, dark-haired man anymore. Someone remarked that, as Eleanor had said, change always starts with small things, and that's exactly how it happens. Ray, holding his sword, shouted that he was ready for action. The little girl wished him luck, assuring him that he would succeed. He swung the weapon with determination, feeling a surge of strength from her encouragement. Trying to catch a one-horned rabbit, Ray missed and shouted angrily after the fleeing animal. Mina called out to him to stop, but a dark, fiery silhouette suddenly appeared nearby, freezing him. The squad was heading to Mount Observer on a guild mission. The girl impatiently said that it was time to stop stalling, otherwise it would get dark before they finished and had time to eat, which made one of the boys feel embarrassed. The young adventurers arrived with supplies. One of the men thanked them for their assistance, noting their energy, and the young man proudly recounted that after his last mission, he had been officially recognized as a knight. They were then invited to join the dinner, offered roast rabbit. The group happily accepted, sitting animatedly around the fire. At the table, a girl looked ill, and her friend explained that she was learning how to properly bleed before cooking. A boy awkwardly apologized for being fed by others, and a woman sitting next to him admitted she didn't like meat. Mina said the jerky was too tough and chewy, making Rhea hesitant to try it. But the boy insisted, and she took a piece in frozen surprise when he said, "Try it first, then judge." The girl, biting into the meat, perked up and happily declared it soft, juicy, and delicious. The boy, relieved, confirmed that, yes, it was indeed meat, and the two men behind him burst into laughter. During the meal, someone mentioned a tall building near their house and suggested they report their findings. The others asked curiously what exactly they were talking about. Soon they were standing on the balcony, looking out at the mountains. One pointed to the road leading to Aldania, the other recalled that this was where Lania's family had once lived, but their conversation was interrupted by a column of smoke on the horizon. The four boys stared into the distance in amazement. One asked if the forest was on fire, another assured him it was a signal fire, and the third, smiling, praised Ed for his quick thinking. They watched as new plumes of smoke rose along the highway, explaining that the white smoke signified no change in the demon lands. Thanks to this chain of posts, messages were transmitted instantly, making communication between settlements nearly perfect. The boy pointed excitedly into the distance, calling out to Bistasan, pointing out something unusual. The two nearby exclaimed enthusiastically, praising his observation and intelligence, amazed by what they saw. A few days later, at the eastern gate of Tree, the girl noticed that the smoke over the mountains had changed color. She quietly noted the change, feeling a slight thrill at what it might mean. The Aldania expedition team returned to the village, where the residents greeted them with joyful cheers. They thanked them for their work and admitted they had been eagerly awaiting their return. The crowd greeted the travelers with thunderous applause and hugs. Among the joyful faces, a little girl screamed, calling out to her father and older brother, who had just arrived in the bustling village. Two men rode up in a cart, and the girl joyfully ran to greet them. She smiled and said he had grown so much and now looked like a true hero, genuinely happy to be back. Two children reacted with delight to the news that the smoke signal heralded the return of the Aldania restoration team. One of the girls remarked on Lanio-chan's beaming happiness. To celebrate the Aldania restoration team's success, a grand feast was held. The girl cheerfully encouraged everyone to eat their fill, mentioning that the rabbits they were currently cooking had been caught by Minya and her friends. The woman tasted the food and praised its taste. The man joked that with such cooking, Lania would soon find a husband, causing the young man to blush and ask his father to stop saying such strange things. Noticing her confusion, he asked what was wrong. She admitted that Ed was indifferent to her and was a much better cook. He laughed and replied that this was no reason to be sad, since everyone has their own talents. Two children asked the man what Eldania was like. Two girls joined the conversation, asking if it was true that it was now uninhabitable. Everyone waited impatiently for the story. The man agreed to tell the story, and a crowd of curious children immediately gathered around, joyfully shouting that they wanted to listen. The story began with a description of his hometown, surrounded by green mountains and a clear lake. But when a miasma came from the demon lands, everything around perished, and monsters filled the surrounding area, destroying life. Dan explained that although it was no longer possible to live there, the people who had moved to Rainierda had not lost their faith and still dreamed of returning Eldania to its former glory. The expedition team replaced the contaminated soil, introduced miasma-resistant creatures, and cast cleansing spells, gradually expanding the safe zone around the camp at Lake Erda. The eastern shore of the lake began to revive, and rumors of a dead city became a thing of the past. People joyfully discussed how soon they could return to Eldania and call it home again. Ray hopefully said he'd like to show his grandchildren the place where he grew up one day. His friends reminded them to be patient, the restoration had only just begun. The crowd responded with cheerful cheers in honor of Eldania and Rainierda. Elia brushed away tears of joy, repeating how happy she was to see all this. The two children nearby noticed that their father was also crying, but they realized they were tears of happiness. The boy noted that the atmosphere in the Rainierda slums today was unusually cheerful. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, the residents felt genuine hope and pride. Two men discussed whether it was too early to celebrate, given that so many difficulties still lay ahead. Behind them, four children exchanged glances upon hearing about the lack of funds for reconstruction and wondered how they could help. The conversation soon turned to the catastrophic shortage of funds. The girl reminded them that Minya had some money, but the man explained that the situation was still dire. The others worriedly wondered what would happen next. Ray was stunned when the man stated that Eldania's recovery would likely never be completed and that Rainierda could collapse. He added that obtaining new loans was impossible due to the dire economic situation. The man asked if he could count on the guide's power, but he bitterly replied that he had lost it long ago. The girl next to him looked up in surprise, unable to believe that the one they considered special was now helpless. Silence fell over the shop until one of the people present sighed and admitted there was no other option. Suddenly, a loud cry of protest rang out. Someone firmly demanded they wait and not give in so easily. A young man stepped forward and told the adults they were giving up without even trying. He declared that the people of Rainierda still believed in them and hoped for a future that could not be betrayed. Ed's supporters gathered around him. He said that hope can be turned into strength if we work together. A girl next to him confidently added that if we need money, we all just need to work as hard as we can. Elia enthusiastically promised to make more tea and jam, and Mina agreed to help tirelessly. One of the men was surprised to learn that they made their own jam, to which the other calmly asked what was wrong with that. The group stood on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a valley filled with wild apple trees. One of them explained that Minya had discovered this place by chance while treasure hunting, and now it could be the beginning of a new venture. The man confessed that he had once been a gardener, and the woman thoughtfully recalled that they used to grow fruit in Eldania. She dreamed of reviving her family's business, admiring the sun-drenched view. Someone suggested that fruit orchards might save Rainierda's economy. Another was surprised and asked what he meant, not fully understanding the bold idea. The young man countered that gardens require special conditions and land, which they didn't have. Ed considered this, and at that moment the narrative shifted to a distant view of forested hills. Ed confidently declared that if all the land belonged to the Lord, the only way out was to negotiate with him directly. Those standing behind him exchanged worried glances, struck by his resolve. The boy offered to speak with the owner in person, standing on a quiet street with the majestic castle visible behind him. His confidence compelled the others to follow him without further ado. The man loudly apologized for his daughter's behavior, and two girls whispered that pretending was pointless, she didn't understand anyway. One of them remarked that she should have seen her parents' faces right now. The girl apologized for the delay and said she had already discussed the matter with her father. She was praised for her responsibility, and the crowd at the castle gates apologized for the sudden intrusion into the Lord's mansion. The man confirmed that support for the orchard project was generally approved. The girl explained that the fruit should be sold in Trier, and the business must continue after Eldania's restoration, emphasizing that there were conditions. She happily added that every year she would need to make and deliver jam to her, and Ed agreed with a smile, clarifying that this was her father's personal wish and one of the most important requirements. One of the men said that a school should be built in Rainierda, as gardens alone are not enough for prosperity. The girl noted that education shapes people, and history has already proven its importance. The woman explained that the garden project could rid the slums of the stigma of parasitism. Two girls stood on the balcony and looked out over the city, wondering how serious all this really was. Someone remarked that the school stipulations sounded like a typical demand a lord might make. His words echoed against the backdrop of the street, where a new sign hung above the door. The group discussed the need for a school. One of the boys explained that most children in the slums can neither read nor write, and a young girl passionately expressed her dream of finally seeing one built. Dan explained something, citing Mina as an example, who was cheerfully counting out loud, skipping from number to number. Ray watched her with slight doubt, not understanding how this could lead to serious learning. The guy explained that the school would help children stay away from the streets and crime, and the other man replied that he was not against the idea itself, but was worried about where to find reliable people who could teach. The man confessed that he once dreamed of becoming a scientist and believed he would be better at that than with a sword. The girl asked him incredulously if he was confident in his abilities, and someone nearby remarked that she lacked faith in him. The young man smiled and declared that the teacher's situation had been resolved and suggested they begin with open lessons outdoors to prove their seriousness. After that, he cheerfully announced that he was about to begin roll call. The three children joyfully shouted the names of Lanya, Minya, and Ed, who turned around in confusion. One of them noted with surprise that there were only 3 of them, but the others simply laughed it off, as if everything was going according to plan. The boys were worried that the Lord wouldn't consider such a school a real one with such a small number of students. So they decided they urgently needed to attract more children and take action immediately. The trio excitedly shouted that classes were starting right now, inviting everyone to join, promising that they would be taught important things. The children asked incredulously why they needed to study if they needed to earn money, and one loudly asked if they were feeding them. The man replied that work could wait, but the crowd loudly protested that they wanted to work, even though the adults didn't understand. Harris complained irritably that the others were barely making ends meet and mentioned that Dr. Mirren had described the dire situation. One of his friends called his name in concern, but he didn't answer. Ray explained to the children that school is a path to knowledge and wisdom that will help them earn more. He cited the example of those who brewed tea with him, who managed to turn a simple craft into profit. The determined young man told his stunned friend that without an education, others would take all the good jobs. He added that he intended to study every day and asked what the others would do. The boys hesitated, but one said he'd go if Harris decided to do the same. After a brief pause, several more children immediately agreed to follow him. Harris dryly remarked that he was helping not for Rainierda's sake, but for his own. His friend thanked him, and the girl waved goodbye from behind as they set off to find new students. The cheerful teacher greeted the assembled children and announced that they would start with letters, then move on to numbers, so that everyone would be able to count, buy, and understand the price of things. During class, the teacher cheerfully asked everyone to repeat syllables out loud. The girl laughed and said he was a bad teacher, but he, unoffended, admitted he was still happy doing it. Dan noticed someone looking ill and approached to ask if everything was okay. The student awkwardly looked away, unable to explain what exactly was happening to him. One boy couldn't concentrate due to hunger, and soon several others admitted to feeling the same way. The teacher frowned, realizing that this was a serious matter that needed to be addressed. A cheerful boy called everyone to gather near the makeshift classroom as another child rolled up a cart filled with steaming pots. Curious voices immediately began whispering, asking what was inside.
The children cheered as their lunches began to be distributed. One asked in surprise what was going on, and another explained that the food was prepared by the families of students who had decided to help the school. The man explained that most of the food came from their own supplies and expressed hope that when the children grow up, they will remember his help and become regular customers. A nearby boy listened attentively, recognizing the importance of what he said. The children joyfully raised their spoons, and the girl reminded them that classes would resume after lunch. She invited the boy to join them at school, adding that they could eat there too. The others joyfully sang along to the rice song, filling the courtyard with laughter. The students eagerly attended biology, arithmetic, and magic lessons. The school gradually became popular among children from the slums. A girl enthusiastically demonstrated a fire spell, delighting her classmates. During physical education, the children happily raised their arms in the air, then ate their school lunch with gusto. Later, they planted seeds in the learning field, delighted by the steadily growing number of students. The children ran to the large tent, where a boy rang a bell, urging everyone to hurry, classes were about to begin. The echo of the bell echoed throughout the yard, filling the morning with vitality. The students proudly showed off the renovated school, now complete with desks, a roof, and its own bell. One girl said she hoped their father would appreciate their efforts, while another smiled, calling it all a miracle. The girl with curly hair asked the boy if he had heard a strange sound, and then suggested that they all go together and see what was happening, already sensing something interesting. After a long climb, the group reached Reincarnation's farm. One of the children suggested treating it like a school excursion, while another explained that the farm was built through the combined efforts of all the residents. The man told the children that their families and neighbors were working right now, so they should go and say hello. The children agreed unanimously, one called him Dad, another introduced them all as a class, and the man, looking at them, said with a smile that it was a wonderful painting. They discussed how the trees had grown in just a year, recalling that the old farmer mages of Eldania had helped speed up the growth of plants with ancient spells. A group of children joyfully received fruit samples. One man explained that, thanks to their collective efforts, the first deliveries of produce had begun. A girl with a hair clip added that the branches were brought from Eldania and grafted onto local trees, so the taste should be just like their old home. Ray, Mina, and another boy were discussing the success of the school and the farm when a girl suddenly ran up and excitedly said that something serious was happening nearby, calling everyone to follow her. That night, the group stood frozen in amazement at the pile of coins, learning that they were the money that had covered the clinic's debts, thanks to farm income. They didn't know what to do with such a large amount of money. The boy expressed doubt that this would be a problem, offering to return the money. The girl with the bow asked why, since it was a thank you, and the other added that Minya would surely be pleased with such recognition. Everyone agreed that the money was a sign of deep gratitude from the residents of Reincarnation. The boy confirmed this with a kind smile, feeling that their efforts had truly made a difference in people's lives. Then he proposed an idea to bring joy to Marin and everyone who came to the clinic. The others enthusiastically decided to think of something that would benefit everyone. The girl happily supported the idea. Soon, two friendly maids joyfully greeted guests at Café Elfel, smiling at each one and inviting them in. A neat building with a sign shining in the sun could be seen in the background. A customer, having sampled the soup, exclaimed that it was excellent. Others asked for more, and the staff directed patients to the adjacent examination room. The place had its own friendly, noisy rhythm. Ray explained that the cafe's success was made possible by the farm. Mina served another cup of tea with a smile, and now residents have a place to relax and enjoy the aroma of herbs. The guide greeted Lania's father warmly, who responded sheepishly, mentioning the upcoming restoration expedition. The village was alive with life, children playing, and adults talking hopefully about Reincarnation's future. The man announced he had been appointed liaison for the Eldania expedition. The girls, surprised and concerned, asked why he had to go, as they had previously expected him to remain in the village. The young man reflected that many considered him too weak for such a job and couldn't understand why he had been chosen. He sighed, wondering if this mission was more than just a simple assignment. The older man said he'd thoroughly vetted everyone involved in the garden discussions, and the younger man admitted he already knew who had actually been chosen.
He asked why a man with such a past was hiding in the slums, but there was no answer. A few days later, the two girls said a warm farewell, wishing everyone good luck and a safe return. Their smiles concealed their anxiety, but their voices echoed with faith in the expedition's success. Elia joyfully announced the start of the journey and led a group of children, including Mina and other familiar faces. One of the boys asked in surprise why they had all decided to set out together, but the other's eyes sparkled with excitement. The carriage moved slowly along the mountain roads, while the travelers discussed how nice it was that the children were allowed to accompany the adults. Someone remarked that the little ones were doing a great job of hunting goblins, and another girl quietly confessed that she was eager to see her father and Eldania. The girl merrily sang a song about the long journey to Eldania, while the boy behind her, walking wearily, asked how much farther it was. The others laughed when she anxiously inquired if they had finally reached their destination. The man helped the girl into the carriage, where two joyful companions were already seated, delighted by the horse's smooth movements. One of them smiled gratefully at Lania for the opportunity to ride. On a snowy mountain pass, two men in cloaks watched the slowly moving caravan. One confirmed that everything was going according to plan, while the other suggested the girl try riding this route herself. Someone confirmed that their target was indeed the expeditionary force. Meanwhile, the children, unaware of this, sat by the fire, sharing dinner and laughter under the calm, starry sky. By the campfire, a burly warrior explained that there were still 3 more nights to Eldania. He advised them to take turns watching and get a good night's sleep, while 2 little children curiously asked if monsters appeared at night. The man assured everyone it was just a precaution. The others cheerfully agreed, deciding they were in no danger that night, and the conversation turned to jokes. The girl asked doubtfully if her father was truly so strong. The 2 boys proudly exclaimed that he was the savior of Eldania and that Elf Sama himself was at their side, while a coughing child nearby tried to finish his dinner. At this time, Eldania was under attack by a horde of monsters, and the kingdom of Melria was on the brink of civil war. The people of Eldania found themselves abandoned by their lords and their land, without troops or aid. The determined young man declared that they were only alive thanks to the brave elves who had come to their aid from neighboring Titania. Behind him stood a squad of armed elves, ready for battle. Elia was delighted to realize that the elves were the true saviors of Eldania. Mina reassured Ed, who watched anxiously, fearing that his father's weakness would lead to disaster. The Duke reflected on his own helplessness as he listened to Mina's reproach. And yet, it was then that he decided to send all his knights to defend Eldania, realizing there was no other way. The boy stood face to face with the monsters that had emerged from the darkness. He trembled and stuttered with fear as the creatures' menacing growls echoed behind him. The young warrior hurled his sword with a cry, striking the monster with a force that made it howl. The other 2 recoiled, unprepared for such a swift attack, and the scene filled with the clash of steel. One of the elves exclaimed in relief that Gitsama was alive, another confirmed that the commander had arrived, and a third hastily began reporting while the battle with the monster raged in the background. The knights were almost completely destroyed by the poisonous miasma. The sole survivor, clad in armor, raced through the stone ravine while cries echoed behind him ordering him to flee for the sake of his clan and country. The crowd gasped when the boy announced that the pure-blooded prince had died. People began shouting, praising the noble family and arguing over who would now inherit the rulerless lands. The armored warrior stood, feeling the weight of responsibility, quietly wondering why the lords of Melria were inactive when the demonic realm was already overflowing their borders. A worried girl stood nearby, listening intently. The young commander firmly ordered the knights to be dispatched immediately to save both elves and humans. He emphasized that this was a direct order from the Duke of Salvatore, and it brooked no objection. The guide woke up in tears, and the boy immediately asked if everything was okay. He smiled with difficulty and admitted he'd had a nightmare in which he once again felt helpless and unworthy of his title. The caravan moved slowly along the mountain serpentine. The young man recalled how he had received his position due to his proximity to pure blood, but he admitted that his pride had led to the demise of the knightly order and the loss of many lives. After telling Minya about how his neighbors had seized his land, the boy asked her why she was so silent. The girl became embarrassed and said she had simply broken a chopstick while cooking. Ed calmly offered to lend her his knife and showed her a spoon divided into 2 parts, explaining that it would be more convenient. Mina admired his ingenuity and thanked him with a sincere smile. The guide quietly reflected on how difficult it had been to simply survive. Meanwhile, the girl joyfully remarked on how much easier it was to eat thanks to his idea, and the boy admiringly remarked that the guide's skills were truly masterful. The group was descending the mountain road toward Eldania when one of the girls excitedly pointed out a huge expanse of water. She was corrected, explaining that it wasn't a pond, but the famous Lake Elda. The girls ran to the water, laughing and admiring its clarity. The man warned one to be careful, and said to the other, with a touch of sadness, that this place reminded him of returning home. A stone bridge crossed a calm river, and beyond it, mountains were visible. Someone thought they felt the same joy they had felt many years ago when they first set foot here after a long journey. The group set to work, each reminding the group of their responsibilities. The residents, noticing the elven child among the new arrivals, began to whisper among themselves, and the liaison explained that his duty was to establish contact and assist the locals. The cheerful girl greeted 3 smiling peasants. They asked if she had come to help Eldania and mentioned that Minya had come here from Reincarnation. The girl eagerly inquired about the Sea Sisters. As they climbed the hill, they saw the Lord's old estate. One of them said the man they needed should be inside. When the mansion door swung open, someone loudly asked if the Sea Sisters were there. Everyone froze when they recognized the newcomer. It was Godsama himself, Duke of Salvatore. Several people recoiled in surprise, unable to believe that a true aristocrat stood before them. The girl tearfully confessed that she had made an irreparable mistake. The boy gently hugged her, while the others watched in silent confusion, unsure what to say. The girls hastened to ask him to stop bowing and raise his head, expressing concern and confusion. Their eyes shone with genuine sympathy and respect. The 2 boys exchanged glances, unsure what was happening. At that moment, 3 girls introduced themselves, Socratia, Myriad, and Marianne, explaining that they served under Godsama in the Order of Elven Knights of Salvatore. Celia explained that during the invasion, the Horde had wiped out almost the entire order, and the survivors had scattered to various lands. She emphasized her pride that at least some remained alive and were helping with the recovery, asking them not to blame themselves. The 2 girls started talking about how Minya could become a princess and live a different life. But one of them countered that Minya was already happy with Ed and Lanya. The other thought for a moment, agreeing. Minya and her friend joyfully embraced, confessing their warm feelings for each other, while the boy watched with slight uncertainty. Later, he spoke with the silver-haired man and realized that he was staying in Reincarnation not out of duty, but out of concern for the refugees. The man admitted that many of his actions were motivated by pride, and that he only kept an eye on the survivors because he didn't want to feel his efforts were in vain. The others listened silently, sensing the hidden pain in his words. The young warrior in armor confidently declared that he wasn't afraid of others' judgments. 2 boys behind him added that the people of Reincarnation were still grateful to him and the knights for their protection, even if it was incomplete. The cart moved slowly through the dense forest. One of the travelers reflected on the inevitability of casualties in any struggle, while the other was amazed at how quickly their origin had been revealed, feeling a sense of unease. That night, the swordsman kept watch by the fire while the others slept. He noticed that the enemy had only 1 sentry and decided it was the perfect moment to attack, filling his flask and preparing for action. A man in a cloak and mask appeared in the shadows. He pulled out a dagger, recognizing from its shape that he had found the very weapon they were looking for. The others nearby slept, unaware of what was happening. The mask activated the sword, emitting a resonant sound. Ray, Mina, Celia, and Dan screamed in surprise, jumping to their feet as the sound of the vibrating blade cut through the air. Dan charged, fighting furiously against his shackled opponent. His sword clanged with the blows, while Ray stood aside, stunned by the speed and force of the fight. The girl asked, confused, what was going on, and the boy explained that his sword was reacting to danger. The man apologized for his carelessness while on duty, and the boy thanked fate and his ancestors for the legacy that had saved their lives. Ray calmly analyzed the situation, surmising that the camp had been sprayed with sleeping gas. He concluded that the attacker was human and the former lord was the target, though the motive remained unclear. The next day, he reflected on how he felt like a target, but couldn't prove it. The cart rolled through the fields, and his companions admired the views, happy to be back and quietly admitting they missed home. As the booming sound of hammer blows echoed through the city, someone asked in surprise what was going on, while another agreed, expressing curiosity at the sudden commotion. The children were busily constructing a fortified wall around Reincarnation. Two boys were discussing the construction plan when a man, noticing Ed and his friends returning, joyfully greeted them. One man thanked them for their help at the shop, and two writers confirmed that they had returned home, asking if construction had already begun, seeing the city come to life. The group discussed the massive construction project in Reincarnation. Demand for food and materials was growing rapidly. Ed was praised for his contribution to trade, to which he reacted sheepishly, not expecting such recognition. The man explained that the Lord had decided to build a new wall because Reincarnation had become prosperous and was now considered a valuable area worthy of protection. Ed was called the main inspiration for the school and the farm, but he modestly denied it, laughing along with the others who convinced him that he had a real talent for leading people. The young man entered to report on the mission. The senior officer accepted the papers, congratulated him on his success, and inquired about Eldania. He admitted that he had received the assignment after revealing his identity. The young man asked not to be called by his previous name anymore. The elder asked if he intended to continue hiding, despite his success in restoring Eldania. The two present exchanged surprised glances. He paused quietly, then nodded and said that the saying about the weight of a crown was probably true. After a short pause, he added that it was inevitable duty demands one stand up straight, no matter how heavy the burden. A crowd of burly workers burst into the cafe, surprising the young man. The woman explained that workers had been flocking there daily since construction began, as the place had become their favorite place to eat and relax. Nina eagerly took on the task of preparing and serving the dishes, delighted that customers kept coming back. Ed was a little nervous, promising to focus on seasoning, while Mina looked forward to another busy but fun day. The waitress struggled to keep up with the influx of orders, while customers vied with each other to ask if they could order now or at another table. One of the guests, smiling, asked if she was using magic. A line of burly men stretched to the next block. Word about the cute waitresses quickly spread. Two passers-by looked on in amazement, and Eleanor added with a smile that some people didn't come for the food at all, but to see the boy from the kitchen. The twin ponytailed girl confidently asked the young man why he was there and demanded that he surprise her with a delicious meal. Ed instantly realized he was in for a real culinary challenge, as she was renowned for her ability to revive impoverished lands. Ed enthusiastically promised to prepare a dish the likes of which even the Count's family had never tasted. The girl smiled shyly, warning him that he was setting the bar too high, but a glimmer of curiosity flickered in her gaze. The hero gathered fresh eggs, oil, and vinegar, then asked for wind magic to whip up the sauce. He explained that no one had ever tasted such a flavor before, instructed them to add chopped eggs and herbs, and then bake the main dish in the oven. Roasted rabbit with mushrooms and tartar sauce was served. The girl with the cat ears eyed the unfamiliar sauce warily, hesitating whether to try it first. After tasting it, she enthusiastically remarked on the dish's richness and tenderness. Ed happily replied that he was happy to oblige, and she added that the sauce's acidity perfectly refreshed the flavor, making it flawless. The man returned home to a lively girl, excitedly telling him that Ed had invented a new dish, one so delicious that Eli-chan wanted to serve it at the banquet. Someone nearby smiled, pleased with the news. Celia was delighted that the food was truly delicious, and Ray remarked that throwing a banquet was perhaps unnecessary. After a brief exchange, the girl invited everyone to begin their meal. The fair-haired man smiled warmly, saying he saw real talent in Ed. Ed uttered his name in surprise, but the other man simply waved it off as if it was nothing and continued eating. The group sat down at a large table. One of them suggested thanking the heavens for the food, after which everyone began dinner with a cheerful noise, enjoying a rare, peaceful evening. Suddenly, they noticed red smoke rising from Mount Dozernea. One of them anxiously asked what was happening, while the other immediately pointed to the source, pale with a premonition of disaster. The city's crowds were in panic upon learning of the monster invasion. People wondered if the miasma would turn Reincarnation into ruins like Eldania, and where to flee now. The woman tried to calm the crowd, urging them not to jump to conclusions. A nearby girl anxiously remarked that it was still unknown whether Dr. Miran's prediction would come true. Rainierda's walls were still unfinished, the workers had fled, and fear gripped the residents. Someone suggested fleeing before it was too late, but another man sharply objected, demanding that they not so panic. Mina firmly stated that Elia and her father would definitely help, as they wouldn't abandon the people. Ray agreed, adding that they mustn't lose faith. If they left their homes, they would have nowhere to go. In despair, the people discussed the possibility of becoming refugees again, but the determined young man declared that they would not give up. He believed that there would always be a way to protect Rainierda if they worked together. The crowd listened to a man who confidently supported the plan but noted the shortage of materials and labor. Then another offered to speak with the Lord and negotiate assistance and resources for fortifying the city. The children enthusiastically asked their father to let them help, but he smiled gently and explained that protecting the city was the responsibility of adults. Thanking them for their zeal, he advised them to continue doing what they already knew how to do: learn and help their own. In class, a girl said that Minya should focus on her studies today and not interfere with the adults' affairs, adding that the elders would handle the situation regarding the invasion. Someone noticed that Guide Sensei was absent today, which caused a slight concern. Ray asked if the invasion was truly so dangerous, but Dan confidently declared the threat couldn't be underestimated. The two boys arrogantly declared that if the demonic beasts were defeated, everything would resolve itself. Ray angrily called one of them a moron, but the other countered that the monsters were real and nothing to laugh about. The two boys began arguing loudly until Dan told them to shut up and focus on the lesson. The boy silently clenched his fists, feeling frustrated. He knew no one was taking what was happening seriously, but he could tell from their expressions that even the children were starting to fear what was happening outside. The Lord approved Gid's proposal, but issued a stern warning: if anything went wrong, Rainierda would be abandoned and the gates locked. Gid, remaining calm, thanked him for his trust and promised not to let him down. The man on the throne listened in silence. A servant cautiously asked why he trusted the words of a man from the slums, but the woman standing nearby politely thanked him for the opportunity, bowing slightly. Two men watched the plane from a balcony. One recalled that the last such invasion had occurred 80 years ago, while the smiling elf standing below recounted how he had personally saved people during several such disasters. 2 days later, one man reported that he had collected the last of the oil supplies in the city. Another said that a new shipment would soon arrive from Draxia, and a third thanked Doradin-san for his assistance in organizing the deliveries. The young man doubted whether setting the enemy on fire would work, but the silver-haired man explained that they had once saved a village without walls that way, adding that the mages would have to control the direction of the wind. At the mountain outpost, 4 men watched the smoke rising in the distance. One reported that the invasion had been spotted and the creatures would need several hours before attacking. Another ordered preparations to move out, and at that moment, a girl ran up to him, calling his name. The girl anxiously asked if anyone had seen her Pato, explaining that he had disappeared from school along with the other children. The boy turned pale, instantly realizing the gravity of the situation. He called out for Pato and Keiji as he ran across the field, but none of the neighbors saw them. People shook their heads, insisting that none of the missing had ever returned. When word came that the axe had disappeared from Pato's house, everyone gasped. Someone suggested that the children might have gone into the forest to fight monsters, sparking a heated argument. Some wanted to run after them, others thought it was madness. The boy called out to Ed, Lanya, and Minya, asking if they'd been to the forest before. They confidently replied that they knew the way and could manage, after which he decided to turn to the adults for support. Pato and Keiji noticed the smoke change color, realizing the monsters were close. At that moment, Mina heard a rumble in the thicket and became wary, sensing danger approaching as the sounds grew louder. Ed caught the goblin's familiar cry and warned Edkuan that the situation was dangerous. He began searching for the source, but couldn't see anything through the foliage. Someone crouched down to examine the tracks. He noticed a child's footprint, rabbit droppings, and snakeskin, but then blurted out in confusion that everything else was a decoy. The boy shouted that he had found the child's tracks and urged everyone to move immediately. He pointed with his staff, while another boy walked ahead, holding a shovel at the ready. The group moved cautiously deeper into the forest, trying not to make any noise. One boy, trying to hide his fear, promised to be the first to cut down any monster he saw, while another convinced the skeptical girl that they were the heroes capable of saving Rainierda. The squad prepared to meet the goblins emerging from the forest, but suddenly a whole horde poured out of the thicket. Panic gripped everyone. Fear gave way to despair as the children realized they were no match for such a mass. Suddenly, the figure on the hill shouted at the three of them to drop to the ground and, raising his staff, unleashed a powerful fireball. The flash blinded everyone, and an explosion ripped through the air, stunning even the children running across the field. Ed loudly asked if everyone was safe and, after confirming no one was hurt, ordered them to run. The roar of a new wave of creatures could already be heard from the depths of the forest. There was no time to rest. A rumble like an earthquake could be heard. One of the soldiers ordered the oil traps to be set alight, but another insisted on waiting for Ed and the others, who were still in the thicket. The tension grew with each passing second. The group ran, barely breathing, the monsters hot on their heels. Someone shouted not to look back, and another girl cried out in despair that they would be caught. But fear drove them forward faster than they could comprehend. The girl tearfully prayed to the goddess to grant Minya and the others strength, and suddenly her steps truly became lighter. Someone marveled at how they felt guided by grace itself, and the children burst out of the forest. Running out into the open, they came across warriors. A man shouted that the children were safe and ordered the archers to get ready. A moment later, bowstrings twitched, and arrows soared into the air. Goblin-like creatures burned in the flames, and one of the boys breathed a sigh of relief, realizing the danger was over. The clearing was scorched with heat, and the crackling of the fire mingled with the sighs of those rescued. Ray, looking at the forest engulfed in flames, said with relief that Mina and Ed were alive. Someone explained that the walls weren't finished yet, so the guide had transformed the forest itself into a ring of fire, replacing the defenses. The girl excitedly asked if they had defeated the monsters, but Ed calmly replied that it was only the beginning. Behind them, the children shouted joyfully, marveling, as if they had witnessed a miracle. On the other side of the conflagration, new hordes of monsters were gathering. A voice from the tower issued a warning: the tide of monsters would not stop, and the battle was far from over. 5 days into the invasion, the young commander ordered the 13th Division to intercept the enemy as they broke through the fire at Rainierda. The soldiers responded with a curt yes, and rushed into battle. In the rain, chaos reigned at the city walls. The wounded were laid out under awnings, bandages and splints were brought in, and the seriously injured were carried inside. Mud and blood mingled with the noise of orders. Elia quietly chanted a spell, healing the cut on Ray's arm. He gritted his teeth, asking her to be gentle, and she smiled and told him to hold on and not pretend to be braver than he was. Ray served a bowl of hot soup, saying the warmth would restore strength. Mina thanked him and invited the others to join in, turning the makeshift kitchen into a small island of comfort amid the chaos. One of the men praised the meat, noting that Eleanor had sent the best supply, while another happily agreed that the food was wonderful. The third held the bowl silently, feeling gratitude without words. Ray asked about the situation at the front. Dan admitted that his forces were waning, but they were holding on for now. Another added that, despite everything, no one had died. Mina and her assistants were rescuing the wounded. A confident man shared the good news: the entire town was helping with the defense. The woman added that the medical camp had become the heart of Rainierda, and everyone respected their dedication. The conversation brought hope. According to reports from the northern tower, the invasion had come to an end. The people rejoiced until a soldier came running, shouting, demanding Commander Rainierda immediately. A boy ran in and asked what had happened. He was told that the firewall had broken through at the eastern gate, right next to the new city quarter. The battle for Rainierda intensified. Huge hordes of monsters descended on the southern line of defense, threatening to break through it, despite the participation of the Count's knights, who stood shoulder to shoulder with the townspeople. The commanders debated moving troops south, but one insisted they were already barely holding their positions. He warned that any move would create a breach in the north, where the enemy was also active. At headquarters, the significance of the eastern gate was discussed. The soldiers assured each other they could hold it until nightfall. If they held off the goblins, victory would be theirs. Their resolve sounded like a final promise before the storm. The young elf entrusted Ed and the others with the defense of the city, expressing his complete trust in the people of Rainy Erda. The others advised caution and promised to cover them if the enemy penetrated too close. As the monsters advanced on the walls, the girl begged her father not to overexert himself. She vowed to hold the eastern gate with her friends and return alive while the knights prepared to take the attack. The enemy pressure proved unbearable, the troops retreated, morale sank. One soldier shouted that a message must be sent to the count immediately. It was time to lay siege and close all the gates. A deafening roar erupted from the thicket as the monster fell right in front of the fortifications. The young man clutched his sword, insisting that they must push back the enemy, otherwise the city would fall, as the soldiers had already taken refuge behind the walls. When he declared he would go himself, the others tried to hold him back. No one believed one man could handle such a giant, but his eyes shone with a determined calm. Dan acknowledged that the only path to victory was unity. He called himself weak, but vowed to lead the line of defense and set an example so that others would believe in themselves and rise to the fight. The squad encountered a gigantic creature, and someone whispered of the hopelessness of the situation. Then the elf recalled all his years of training and his students, Minya, Mirin, Ed, and Lanya, and smiled wryly, calling himself the living embodiment of stubborn fate. A small figure stood before a colossal demon, sword raised. Shouts urged him not to give up and to lead the people on. He gripped the hilt and stepped forward to meet the monster. The elven knights from Salvatore charged on horseback, lances raised. The girl at their leader's side smiled and apologized for the delay in gathering the order, adding that she was proud of her lord fighting at the forefront. The girl anxiously asked what was happening, but the boy assured her that 3 sisters from Eldania had come to her aid. Another warned her not to be distracted, the contractions were still raging nearby. In the distance, they spotted goblins approaching. Someone sighed wearily, saying they had enough problems with these creatures as it was. A boy whistled and told the children to throw stones to distract the enemy, reminding them that only children and wounded adults were with them. Another boy, smiling, praised his courage, earning a sharp rebuke to stop fooling around. Hidden beneath the hood was a man recalling a past failure. Now he saw a chance to correct it in the chaos of battle. But opposite him stood Ed, holding his sword, his gaze firm, ready to fight without hesitation. At the estate of Marquis Kumar Bomazan, the old man confirmed the target's identity, a child named Ed. He coldly ordered him eliminated as a threat, without allowing any unnecessary witnesses. Under the narrow crescent moon, 2 people discussed the order. One clarified that the child simply had not paid the full reward, and the second calmly said that he would do it all alone. The elderly man asked him if he didn't know why the Marquis was so concerned about the cursed boy on the border. The hooded figure replied that he was of rare royal blood, and the nobility feared a power they couldn't control. The old man explained that the legend of the cursed child was a fabrication. The true reason was that the boy possessed an extraordinary gift and had managed to revive the slums of True, thereby disrupting the usual order of the nobility. The boy with the sword was doubting whether the kingdom's founder's power truly existed when the assassin suddenly approached, quietly saying that his only goal was to eliminate the target at any cost. The boy cautiously asked the cloaked figure who she was and whether she had arrived as reinforcements, insisting that all adults should proceed to the east gate. He then demanded that the hood be removed, feeling uneasy about fighting alongside the stranger. In response, the figure cursed furiously and hurled a blow. The young man, unsuspecting, barely managed to react. A worried cry rang out in the distance, someone calling for Harris. The young man desperately warned the girl that the assassin from their previous trip to Eldania had returned for him. She recoiled in horror, noticing a dagger in his hand, its blade gleaming with a thick, poisonous sheen. The determined young man raised his flaming sword and declared he would not go down without a fight. The girl standing next to him wove a wall of fire in front of him, blocking the approaching monster's path. Ray lunged forward and unleashed an attack on the masked opponent. The latter sneered, disbelieving the child was capable of causing harm, but soon doubled over in pain. The blade had finally struck home. The 2 children screamed, demanding that Harris stop attacking and leave Ed alone. He turned around in confusion, but the next moment he was struck and, cursing, collapsed to the ground. Mina screamed Ed's name as he activated the flames and the blessing of acceleration. His silhouette blazed with magical light, and he rushed at the enemy with a cry, leaving a trail of fire in his wake. The last day of the invasion was marked by silence. Children gathered in a scorched clearing, where some joyfully celebrated, and the sunset blazed over the horizon, painting the smoking forest in blood-gold tones. 5 days later, residents returned from the capital and neighboring towns, beginning to clean up tree. A girl with short hair noticed that Reincarnation, fortunately, was almost unharmed. The forest burned to the ground, but construction of the new wall resumed. The workers toiled tirelessly, and on the hill, the girl watched them silently, sensing the city's rebirth. The man who attacked Ed was caught by the Lord's men and interrogated. Nearby, the girl noticed a house with a sign reading "Off-Site Reception" and whispered thoughtfully that she hoped for peaceful days. Lania greeted her friends joyfully, asking if they had come to see them off. They explained that they were continuing to rebuild Eldania and would return home soon, promising to write at the first opportunity. The girl asked if anyone had seen Ed Kuan and learned that he had laid flowers at Lord Gid's grave the day before. She promised to pass on word to her brother and father, thanking them for their concern. The boy reported that Ed had headed to the main square with Minya. She thanked him and apologized for interrupting her work. Together, they discussed the difficulty of cleaning up the aftermath of the invasion. The crowd listened to a speech praising the city's defenders. Amid the applause, a cheerful girl waved goodbye, and a boy standing to the side smiled back. At the ceremony, the young man was unexpectedly awarded the title of Baron of Melria in the name of his late father. He sheepishly asked why such an honor had come now, feeling awkward in front of those gathered. The young man explained that the title bestowed upon the girl was not connected to her origins, but rather a recognition by the people of her kindness, intelligence, and ability to unite Reincarnation. The crowd cheered the noble family's performance, while the older man and the girl discussed Ed and Minya's whereabouts. They were informed that they had recently spoken with Lady Eleanor and were heading back to Reincarnation. The man asked if anyone had seen Ed, and the young woman confirmed that she had seen him with Minya. Minya soon rushed off to another patient's appointment, and a girl with cat ears politely stopped nearby, wanting to clarify something important. The girl with fox ears cheerfully offered to help Mia, telling her that she had recently spoken with Shell, a new resident of the city. She described them as kind people who had helped her with her travels and left a good impression. The girl politely asked permission to enter, and the boy informed her that Ed and Minya had come to visit Harris. He smiled, assuring everyone that the wound had almost healed thanks to their treatment and care. The boy joked that all the troubles began because someone with black hair was considered bad luck. The girl was surprised, but he added that it was this misfortune that saved her life, and she acknowledged her deep debt to him. The cheerful girl said the best way to repay her was to work hard for Reincarnation. A boy with tousled hair asked why Lania was back, and the other boy just smiled quietly, as if he knew the answer. Outside the clinic, one of the girls hesitantly asked the other why she had come. She replied that perhaps it was better for them not to meet. Later, the boy wondered if those words were meant for him. The girl asked who it was and whether she knew a young man named Ed. Upon hearing that he lived nearby and helped in the kitchen, the cloaked figure was visibly surprised. Ray thanked him for the story, then reflected on the woman's familiarity as if she had a touch of Ed in her. She then suggested out loud that she might be his mother, stunning everyone. Mina enthusiastically declared that she wanted to meet Ed's mother and was ready to help find her, but the guy quietly refused, saying that he did not want this meeting. Ray, tired and sweating, said it would be best under any circumstances. Two girls nearby were surprised and asked why he thought so. A little boy lay in bed, and a girl said goodnight to him. He lay awake for a long time, thinking that there was no justification for abandoning a child, and he convinced himself that his feelings were justified. Ed lay curled up, tormented by pain and memories. The girl quietly asked if he was going to meet someone, and he turned his head toward her just as the door creaked open. The boy suggested that the woman, if she was from out of town, was probably staying at an inn. The girl happily agreed and confidently declared that they would definitely find her. The surprised girl asked if the guy with black hair was really Ed. The two people next to her also looked doubtful, and Ed himself tried to answer, embarrassed, not knowing what to say. The people explained that a struggle for the throne had begun in Melria, and Ed's father had become a target when daily assassinations of nobles began in the capital. The woman said she fled the capital to save her unborn child and found refuge among refugees in the chaos of rainy Erda. Assisting her with the birth brought her closer to Mirkan and Gid. The young man recalled how he decided to return to the capital to restore his family's good name, but realized the journey was too dangerous for the child. The woman added that this explains his past. Ray expressed relief that Miran and the others were safe after the invasion, and said that the capital was now calmer under the rule of the new king. A carriage left the city, and someone promised to bring Minya and the others to the capital someday. The two girls watched the carriage depart, noting how empty it would be without them. The boy waved off the teasing with a smile, and the girl next to him burst into laughter. Behind him, the two continued to tease him as the group walked down the road. Someone asked if he'd missed them, but he confidently replied that everything was fine. He was warmed by the knowledge that he understood his mother's feelings and could now visit her whenever he wanted. This knowledge filled his heart with peace and strength. Ray and Mina stood side by side, looking out over their city. Both felt they belonged here. Then Ray suggested they continue on, and Mina happily agreed, filling the day with a bright resolve.